Hello, Kazakhstan. My name is Minkyoung. I was born and raised in Seoul, South Korea. But now I live in Almaty, Kazakhstan. My destiny has led me here, and I'm extremely happy about it. Actually, I started studying Russian in Korea, and during my junior year, I ended up in Uzbekistan as an intern. It turned out that many Koreans lived there and in other countries of the former USSR, and I was curious about their fate. When I graduated from the university, where I majored at regional studies and the Russian language, I went to Kazakhstan. Now I'm getting my doctorate at Kazakh National University, and my thesis is Ethnic Vector in Relations between Korea and the countries of Central Asia. I also teach Korean. I have many students and also many Kazakh friends with whom I spent my time. You know what amazes me the most about Kazakhstan? There are a lot of ethnicities, more than 100, and all live together just like one family. Koreans, Chechens, Ingush, Uyghurs, Germans, Tatars. Consider Kazakhstan their home. This is surprising to me because we don't have such thing in Korea.
And you know, we used to have very few foreigners in Korea 20-30 years ago. Why? Because Korea is an island country. We can't go to North Korea. So we're left with a sea everywhere around us. Therefore, there are few foreigners. You see a blonde or an English woman, so it's wow, sky dweller. Look, white hair. Oh, look, a foreigner. It was 20 years ago.
Only Koreans live in Korea, and I wondered how so many people settled in hospitable Kazakhstan, and I learned a lot of amazing things. Almost 100 years ago, in the 30s of the 20th century, at the time of Great Terror, many people were exiled to Kazakhstan. Koreans, for example, were expelled from Vladivostok and Sakhalin Island within 24 hours. This is a very sad and tragic story. This is still remembered from the words of Korean grandparents, who pass on the sad memories to younger generations. I decided to find out more about it. I'll definitely share with you what I know.
Koreans were brought here from Russia and Vladivostok. The first stop was Ushtabe, the second was Almaty, and the third one, Shymkent, then Kızılorda, and then they were sent to Uzbekistan. And I was in Ushtabe several times. They said the Kazakhs accepted them as friends, as family. They had no possessions with them. It was in winter, it was very cold, and they had nothing to eat.
Against all odds, the people who were exiled here survived. They found a second homeland, they maintained their culture and language. And here's the proof. Today with my friend Yana, whom I met in a golf club, we go to a rehearsal of the play King Somdal's Tricks at the State Republican Academic Korean Theater of Musical Comedy. Oh yeah, don't be surprised, there is one here. Also in Almaty, there are many theaters of other communities living in the country. For example, I know about German and Uyghur theaters, and they're also supported by the state. I think it's just great. The character of Kim Sondal's Tricks is much like Kazakh Aldar Kose, a young man who will always find his way in any life situation because he's cunning, smart, tricky, and ingenious. But at the same time, he's very fair and ready to come to the rescue for those who need it. I think there is a similar character in the folklore of any nation. Korean theater has a rich history. Initially, it was the Far Eastern Regional Korean Theater, founded in 1932 in Vladivostok. In those years, Korea was occupied by Japan, and all manifestations of Korean culture were banned on its territory and got under strict censorship and repressions. And it turned out that this theater was the only one operating outside the Korean peninsula and the very first national Korean theater in the world. Can you imagine? In 1937, as I already told you, Koreans were resettled to Kazakhstan and Central Asia. The theater had to be divided. One part of it ended up in Kızılorda and later in Ushtabe. The other one made it to Tashkent. And in 1968, the theaters changed its status to state-funded and were reunited in Almaty. Throughout its amazing history, the theater has staged more than 250 performances and were watched by 5 million spectators. All performances are in Korean with simultaneous Russian translation. The Korean theater has always been the center of the culture of the Korean community in Kazakhstan, and in my opinion, it's an ethnic and cultural phenomena created thanks to state support and the efforts of the best representatives of the creative elite, both eminent actors and beginning work in this theater. As I told you before, Korean theater has a rich history, and it's fully displayed on this stands. There are photographs of old and modern stage plays, portraits of actors of the past, and those who are working here at the moment, a kind of theater museum. Wow, I didn't expect this to be so beautiful. Yes, it's very beautiful. These are the pictures, historical ones. Yeah, bravo. 500 tours to Korean Republic. It was in 1989 there was a musical for the Independence Day. In 1990, the theater became the State Theater of Seoul. This is after the establishment of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Kazakhstan. Here they got their first award. Here are articles from newspapers, some black photos, and some certificates. Look, you can see some instruments and some books. What's this one? A Kazakh one. A poem. Yes, some historical collage. And these are the modern ones. Color photos. Yes, color photos. Everyone is happy here. And here's the first president of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev. He also visited this theater. And the troupe. These are from 2001-2012. Latest history. Hot of the press. Silk Road. Interesting. Interesting indeed. Well, this is politics as usual. Chinese politics. Silk Road. Well, yes, Korea is also a country on it. Arirang. Oh, where is Arirang? Right here. Here is the large list. All the plays of the theater from 2001, 2012. Is this the local one or foreign one? Korean one, most likely. The theater has a ballet and drama group, vocal soloists, and of course, a folklore ensemble of percussion instruments. It's called Samulnori. I love our drums so much. These sound so beautiful. Just incredible. Wow, such beautiful drums. Multicolored, yes. I think they are Korean. Or maybe somewhere from Asia. You see, there is a dragon here. A picture. Generally, the dragon is one famous symbol of Asian countries. For Korea, the dragon always means something good. You can't beat them. Cool, isn't it? I saw such drums in Korea. We play them in Korea. I saw this one in Kazakhstan. Two small ones.
Я не знала, здесь в Казахстане я с этими встречалась.
The sound depends on the size. If it's small, the sound is thicker, or it's high-pitched. The bigger the drum, the quieter the sound, right? Yes. That's why it's only right. It depends. They have to be of different sizes. What I paid special attention to were the sets and costumes. National costumes are of amazing beauty, so bright and unique. I saw our favorite hanbok on the actors. This is the traditional national dress of Koreans, which appeared as early as the 1st century BC. The women's hanbok consists of jigori, which is a blouse with an open collar, and a chima. This is a skirt. The male hanbok includes a shirt and a loose baji pants. But often men also wear a durumagi, a wrap dress. Previously, the status and age of a person could be determined by hanbok. Rich people had hanboks made of expensive fabrics, mainly of silk. Married women chose green and red fabrics for their outfit. The common people wore cotton and hem hanboks. Now, of course, no one wears such clothes every day. But on holidays, especially the older generation, they dress up in it. Hanboks are in every Korean's closet. Well, we visited a wonderful theater with a spectacular history. We had a lot of impressions. What do you think about the play? Did you like it? Yeah, it was great. Very interesting. I'm so overwhelmed with emotions. Of course, both the history of the theater and the fate of the Korean people living in Kazakhstan are tragic and sad. It's very painful to think about the events of 1937, when whole echelons of people were sent to the steppe without water or food, into the cruel frost, into the unknown. Many did not survive.
Но казахи они встретили, они дали там место жить и работа. И потом, когда весна пришла,
But the Kazakhs met them and gave them a place to live and work. And then, when spring came and Koreans were looking for work, they began to go into agriculture, plant and grow rice and vegetables. And they lived well. And many moved to Астында and Almaty.
и Кызылорда тоже там очень
And there were a lot of Koreans in Kazakh too. And the money, they earned it from agriculture. And in Uzbekistan too, as I heard, many Koreans also began to live there after moving from Vladivostok. And many of them became businessmen, thanks to agriculture.
As I said, the local Koreans have perfectly adapted to the new conditions. Many ethnic and cultural centers have been founded here in Almaty and other cities. Children, youth, retired people visit the centers. Here they have the opportunity to study their language and customs all year round, sing in the choir, and learn national dances and national art. And all of this is for free. Just imagine. Incredible. The main center is located at the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan. In addition to Koreans, it's also visited by representatives of other communities living here. I told you before, there are more than 130 of them. Let's take a look at one of these centers.
Насчет ансамбля плохо знаю. Так, только
I don't know much about the assembly. I just learned about it from you. But we have a Korean center in Nur-Sultan and Almaty. Local Koreans go there and learn Korean language and culture for free. There is a very large center on the corner of Ryazbakiyev and Abay streets, and teachers from South Korea teach there.
They also have community association in Kazakhstan. Recently, we visited its chairman. There are a lot of people who study the history of Koreans in Kazakhstan. These are scientists, researchers, and people who are simply not indifferent to the fate of an entire nation. We've talked with such a person, Professor Lee Bong-jo. He's from Seoul, South Korea, but he has been living in Kazakhstan for almost 7 years, working at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University at the Department of the Far East of the Faculty of Oriental Studies.
Преподаю студентам,
I teach students and do research activities. My research work is related to the Koreans of the CIS. At the beginning of 2000s, I started with a master's degree. And during this time, I traveled through the CIS many times. I did field research there, and I published a lot of monographs and articles. Well, this is certainly very interesting because more than 100,000 Koreans live in Kazakhstan. For over 20 years, I have been researching this issue.
I think Mr. Lee is doing a very important job. First, he explores interesting facts about the history of resettlement of Koreans to the CIS countries, and at the same time, he's looking for ways to bring our people scattered across different continents together, South Koreans and local Koreans. What are the similarities and differences in our mentality? This question doesn't let me go, and I also pursue the same goals in my thesis, and my supervisor helps me in everything.
можно так сказать, мы одна нация.
We can say that we're one nation. Koreans living in the CIS, Koreans living in the Korean Peninsula, there is a general similarity. It's the genes. And here, of course, local Koreans also try to preserve, revive, restore culture, history, language, etc. Here is such a diligence and genes in us. And they also want to preserve and revive traditions. That's what we have in common.
С другой стороны,
On the other hand, local Koreans in the CIS, they were born here, grew up, received an education. Well, that is, they assimilated here. Assimilated people, Koreans.
ассимилированный народ, корейцы.
There is a special word that Korean people from the Far East and the post-Soviet space call themselves, koryo-saram. Koryo refers to the name of the Korean state, while saram means people or person. The settlers spoke a northeastern dialect that was different from the official Korean language. This is how the dialect of Soviet Koreans was formed. Later, most of the koryo-saram became Russian-speaking, but at the same time, they have not lost their language.
Koreans, when they lived in the Far East, called themselves Joseonin. But time has passed when they moved, when they were deported to Central Asia. For some reason, they called themselves koryo-saram. They lived in a foreign land. All the same, they were a small nation, and they wanted to make up a symbolic
The
name.
professor also researches the topic of South and North Korea. This is also a tragic story. After all, the division didn't happen at the behest of the Koreans.
Fate is a very sad word for Koreans, because Korea is now divided into two parts. In general, Koreans for a long time lived as a single soul, a single whole. Well, this fate began with a period of Japanese colonial rule. The Korean peninsula is not liberated by our own strength, by the power of the other state. They were on the Korean peninsula for 3 years. During this time, they built their own ideologies, communism, socialism, democracy, and all that. And then, in 1948, two states were created. We didn't want that. It turned out like this. These ideologies still affect our current society, South and North Korea. We want to unite, but it's very difficult. Why? Because the two ideologies prevent each other from reuniting.
But back to the fate of local Koreans. We can talk for a long time about how hard it was for people who were torn out of their usual life without giving a single chance to choose. But behind this story, there are hundreds and thousands of individual destinies that can blow your mind. As Yana told me, her maternal great-grandmother was also deported from the Primorye, along with her husband and children, to Karaganda, to the tungsten mines. It was hard work, and her great-grandfather died early. They had many children, but only 6 of them survived. They lived very poorly, just like everyone else, and they were constantly starving. And Yana's paternal great-grandfather was executed as an enemy of the nation in 1937 and was rehabilitated only in the 90s. And there are many such stories. But the most important thing is that during this difficult period, Kazakh people supported the deported. Life was not easy for the Kazakhs at that time, but they shared the last piece of bread and helped others to survive.
They had to leave to adapt. At this time, I know that the local Kazakhs, they didn't close their eyes, they didn't connive. They began to help the Koreans. So the Koreans, in these first days of difficulties, could settle. Therefore, there are monuments, the Kazakhs everywhere, as a form of gratitude. Monument of gratitude to Kazakhs. These are the monuments in different places. This is gratitude. Those who have nothing to lose, they have strength. They had no housing, no money, but strength arose. They started looking for what could be done for the family, for the children. As I know, a lot of Koreans have become big-time people. They tried very hard. And the very first thing to say to the Kazakhs is thank you for accepting. And other countries didn't accept us, as I know. They didn't accept us in Russia either. Because of that, they sent everyone here, and the Kazakhs accepted.
At that time, after the deportation, many international families were started. Koreans married women of other nationalities, and many lived and still live very happily. In our time, of course, he won't surprise anyone with such marriages.
Да, здесь в Казахстане там несколько есть, которые из Южной Кореи.
Yes, here in Kazakhstan, there are several men who came from South Korea and married local women, which are Kazakh or Korean or Russian. The very first advantage of a marriage between a Korean and a local Kazakh woman is that the children will be very beautiful. Good skin, good hair, and beautiful eyes, both from mom and dad.
I will tell you an amazing story about one international family. This is the Lees. The head of this family, Valentin Sergeyevich Lee, was directly affected by the tragedy of the resettlement of the Koreans from the Far East. The history of this family can be called proverbial.
Как попали корейцы в Казахстан?
How did Koreans get to Kazakhstan? This is a very long story, and it begins with a concept that you all know very well, in particular from the book The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. In this book, Solzhenitsyn writes that he began the years of repression, resettlements, and executions during the Stalinist regime began with the Koreans. It was Solzhenitsyn who wrote that the first repressed one were in particular the Far Eastern Koreans.
Это были дальневосточные корейцы.
In 1937-38, Stalin, by his decree, deported all Koreans from the Far East to Kazakhstan. And my parents were among these settlers, and my mother often told us, when I was still a child, how they were given 24 hours to pack, and then they were all pushed into the heated goods vans for more than 2 months. They were transported by the railroad from the Far East to Kazakhstan. More than half of those who traveled in these vans died and did not get there.
Everyone who told such stories speaks of the incredible acts of the Kazakh people who helped the deported at that difficult time.
Я казак. А вы кто?
Мы корейцы.
Корейцы? О, дай мой.
They gave the last, but didn't leave them in trouble. While many Kazakhs suffered during the age of war communism and Stalin's terror of 30s just as bad as other nations. It was a terrible time indeed.
И вот именно с корейцев-то и начинается тот период, который называется...
And the years of repression started with the Koreans. Again, in 1937-38, when the Koreans arrived here, the Kazakhs themselves were repressed.
Сами казахи. Вы знаете, что в эти годы
You know, during these years, the entire Kazakh intellectual elite was executed, starting with Sakensi Fulin and Baitursunov. Everyone was murdered. That is, the Kazakhs themselves also suffered during the repressions.
But despite this, both Kazakhs and Russians, everyone who lived here, helped the settlers with whatever they were able to.
The Kazakhs came to the rescue. They gave us shelter at their houses. They fed us, treated us. And only thanks to the Kazakhs, Koreans survived in Kazakhstan. My father often told me, "You thank the Kazakhs. If it were not for the Kazakhs, you wouldn't have been born." I'm a child of the war generation, and I really wouldn't exist. And we know very well that the Kazakhs are the kindest, broad-minded people who helped all the peoples that ended up here, in Kazakhstan. I mean not only Koreans. There were Germans, Chechens, Ingush, Lithuanians, and Poles. How many peoples are there? We consider Kazakhstan to be our homeland, just like the Cossacks do. And Nazarbayev did the right thing when he declared March the 1st a day of thanksgiving or gratitude. It's somehow inconspicuously celebrated. And me, on March the 1st, I always thank the Cossacks with a heart for the fact that despite the difficult years, they gave everything to those who unwittingly ended up in Kazakhstan.
Valentin Sergeyevich not only stayed to live in Kazakhstan, he found his destiny here, created a strong family, has children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. In addition, he managed to get a good education to become a famous and respected person. Valentin Sergeyevich Lee is a doctor of philology, professor of Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, and despite his age, continues to work and shares his invaluable knowledge with his students. He has a reliable partner, his wife, whom he met here, Svetlana Vasilyevna Mitkova. We've been married for 57 years. We have a daughter, 2 grandsons, and 1 granddaughter. She studies in Paris. Another grandson lives here. We already have 2 great-grandchildren, a boy and a girl. We met at the so-called workers' faculty. It was in 1960. I met Valentin Sergeyevich there. Since we lived in the same place, he had to escort me through the ravine. He had to go up, and I had to go down. Since he was a gentleman, and classes ended very late, he followed me home. Then we graduated from university together. Valentin Sergeyevich became a professor, doctor of philological sciences, and I worked in various fields of education. Interestingly, the Korean family welcomed the Russian daughter-in-law. She was half-orphan. Her father died in the war. The children were raised by their widowed mother. For a long time, the young couple lived in their father's house. I'm not from a rich, but from a poor family. But my fiancé was not that rich either. His father had died by this time. And you know, Koreans lived mainly by agricultural work. His mother grew rice. That's how they survived. I began to remember I never had a fight with my mother-in-law. She was an amazingly kind person. We had such a small house on Jangelden Street. As soon as the gates opened, she invited everyone to visit. She stood on the porch and invited everyone over. You know, since I've been conducting my research, I've heard hundreds of times about the similarity in the mentalities of Kazakhs and Koreans, and this is really so. Everyone remembers that Kazakhs shared their clothes, the last piece of bread. And Koreans are also very kind people. They're also very capable, like Kazakhs. They have something in common. Maybe that's why they got along here, Koreans. And by the way, I know that all Valya's relatives have left Tashkent. And still, they continue to live here, in Kazakhstan. They stay here to live in Kazakhstan. Valya's sisters, the nephews, they all quickly packed up and left Tashkent, although they had apartments there. They sold their apartments for a price of flat bread. But all Koreans still live here. A lot of them work and make their contributions to the development of Kazakhstan. Turns out that a lot of books have been written about the resettlement of peoples to Kazakhstan, but I didn't know about it. There is such a writer, Anatoly Kim, a Russian language writer. By the way, he translated the 4-volume book, The Path of Abai. Kim made this translation, a Russian-speaking writer. His books, Onion Field and Nightingale Echo, about the Koreans who were exiled to the Panfilov district and how they survived. By the way, the parents of the writer and academician Anatoly Kim were also deported from the Far East. The future author was born in 1939 in South Kazakhstan, But later his family moved to Sakhalin, and then Anatoly Andreevich studied at the Maxim Gorky Literature Institute in Moscow. Then Kim worked in literature for some time, and even taught for a while in Seoul. Back to our topic, it's probably difficult to find a family that would not have been affected by the repressions of the 1930s.
В лингвистике есть такое понятие языковая семья.
In linguistics, there is such a concept called a language family. And you all know that the Kazakhs, the Kazakh language, and people belong to the Altai family.
Куда входят все тюркские языки,
Altai family includes all Turkic languages,
родина казахов.
and there is an assumption that the homeland of the Kazakhs is Altai. And from there, from Altai, many thousands of years ago, some Kazakhs went to the west and reached Turkey. Therefore, from Kazakhstan to the west, these are all Turkic peoples. And others went to the east and reached Japan.
Finnish linguist and diplomat Gustav John Ramstedt wrote about all this in his research papers. He studied historical linguistics of the Uralic, Altai, Korean, and Japanese languages.
Рамстедт и другие ученые предположили, что корейцы тоже с Алтая.
Ramstedt and other scientists have suggested that Koreans are also from Altai, and in this regard, Koreans and Kazakhs have one ancestral home, Altai.
Доказывают многие лингвисты, я еще раз говорю, это начинается.
And this is historically proven by many linguists, starting with Ramstedt and others. They adhere to this very concept.
Еще раз напомню, что корейцы всегда помнили.
And I'd like to remind you once again that Koreans remembered and always remember that, thanks only to Kazakhs, they stayed on this hospitable land.
Summing up the results of today's eventful day, I can say that everyone lives well and pleasantly in Kazakhstan, whether they are once resettled peoples or whether they are Koreans from South Korea. Kazakhstan is a hospitable and blessed home for many foreigners. This is a land of opportunities, promising future, and a land of indescribable beauty and generosity.
Я сюда попал, это, может быть, тоже это моя судьба.
I got here, maybe this is also my destiny.
Но моя исследовательская
Before that, I often traveled to the CIS, but my research topic was related to the CIS. I didn't know before what kind of country Kazakhstan was, what kind of country it was,
И так я начал уже
what place, what kind of people it had, what culture. It was unfamiliar to me. And so, 7 years have passed already, but I never regret coming here. It wasn't in vain. These people, in their pure soul, hospitable, generous soul,
я
and
побольше времени.
on the street, on the university, at work, I generally spend more time with students, with colleagues, with local people than with our family.
Если вдруг, когда
When I'm
я
on a sudden business trip, I go to Korea for a short time, to my homeland. And as soon as you arrive at the airport, I immediately have such a thought like, oh, I'll finish my business and will return to Kazakhstan as soon as possible. That's how much I got used to live here. Maybe I have already become more Kazakh. Maybe I'm already becoming a Kazakh.
казаха. Может быть, я становлюсь уже казахом.
I have recently begun to study the Kazakh language.
Начал тоже изучать казахский.
Well, I wanted to have more heart in communication with the locals. Maybe in a year
Может быть, еще
or two,
год-два,
I will talk to you in the Kazakh language. not in Russian.
Они на русском языке.
Well, today wasn't a waste. How many emotions I experienced, how much new knowledge I got. It really blows my mind how difficult everything is in this life, but nevertheless, it's so beautiful. I will continue to enjoy this country, this nature, and this people, and I will, of course, share my experience with you. See you soon.